Y is recorded in front of a live studio audience.
So I opened the mail yesterday.
Am I gonna be jealous?
Well, who knows? It says a
Oh,
meal on us, and I get excited. It says
okay.
complimentary tickets to the polling family included.
Oh,
Sounds great. Yes. I do notice that it is from a funeral home in the return address. But
oh, okay.
you're invited a meal on us. Like, listen, free dinner. You know what I'm saying? Like, this will be
Yeah.
great. And seating is limited, so we got to act now.
It's to the whole family, not
Whole
just you?
family. Yep, whole
Okay.
family. Then you open it up, you and a guest. Not cool.
Oh, so
So,
not the whole
not
family.
the whole family. It's addressed to the
Liars.
whole family, which is like wedding invitation protocol.
Right.
We're all going to get a free dinner. Like, yeah.
Correct.
Um, and then it's at noon on a Wednesday, which is just, come on, not cool. And then
No.
here's the ultimate kick in the crotch. And maybe it's only for me that it feels like that way. We do get tickets. It is funeral pre-planning for veterans, navigating the memorial benefits process. So one,
You're not a veteran that I recall.
this is what I'm saying. Like,
Okay.
don't send me something saying, please come. We want you here. Are you a veteran?
Yeah, no, that's not
Because the
great.
elder and I were all set to like tie on our bibs and go over and be like, Where's the food?"
Hmm.
And I get it.
Does
You're
it,
trying to sell something. So you want to,
right. And I
lure them
appreciate
in.
that they're doing something nice for veterans.
Sure. Thank you
Love,
for your service.
yes, but perhaps get a better mailing list so that one, you're not
Yeah.
wasting money on, because you know some non-veterans are gonna just scale
You
their
mean
way in there.
non-veterans like I?
Yeah. Are you gonna show up in your like Boy Scout uniform and be like, I have a uniform?
Right. No, it's that same thing
Yes.
with the strip club. No entry with naval uniforms unless accompanied by proper ID.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah. We discussed this a while ago.
We did.
Yeah, strip clubs
What
that have
about,
that sign up front that,
yeah, well, what if I
yeah.
wore my like flight attendant uniform?
Maybe. I don't know, but I just feel like really big letters, meal on us, enjoy a free meal at Giuseppe's Pizza and Family Restaurant. Come on. That's the kind of place that has one of those flat Ms. Pac-Man games in the lobby.
Oh, yeah, that's the best.
And it's going to smell like garlic bread, and the garlic knots
Uh,
are going to be just dripping in oil. It's going to be great.
and it's gonna have the red and white checked
Yes.
plastic
Yes.
tablecloth and the
Oh
like
my God.
crunchy breadsticks in the like
Mm-hmm.
glass.
Yep. That looks like they're trying to uh, put some sort of air freshener in there.
Yes.
Uh, the hanging lights that have like the different colored panels, like Tiffany, but like
Yes.
tacky
Like it's
Tiffany.
basically gonna look like Pizza Hut in 1983.
Yes. Yes.
In
This
fact,
is
we
what I
could
want.
just go to a Pizza Hut from 1983.
If they were going to give me a free meal, I would even listen to them talk about funeral benefits because I would have questions.
Well, right, because we could use that as research. And then you could
Right.
write off your free meal that you didn't pay for.
Right. And let's be honest here, veteran or not, you're going to need something at some point.
Well, we're not because
Or not, we're going to live
A,
forever.
we're
Yeah.
vampires, but
Right.
B, we already know that if we are not actually vampires, however we die, it's going to be something very strange and
No, we show up,
unfuneral
the gates of
worthy.
hell are going to be closed. Like,
Well, right, they don't want
yeah.
us.
When
We are
what is it?
definitely,
When hell is full, the dead will walk the earth. Was the dawn of the dead? Anyway,
yeah, I don't
I
know.
just felt very almost catfished by this
Well,
letter.
you should call them and tell them.
This is Why, with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling.
This is a really good book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes.
In reading it, I kept thinking to myself, because I think I can speak for all of us. I believe we were all sort of children of this era.
Mhm.
Indeed.
In reading this book, I just kept thinking, we did not know how good we had it at the time.
Yeah. I mean, but honestly, there's been other points. If you look back at music history, you could say like the mid to late 60s was pretty good. The mid,
Oh, certainly.
like the middle of the 70s with all the punk bands was pretty good. I mean, even what's pretty underrated, you could even make the argument the early 80s with like Devo and all those bands, that was
Of
great too,
course.
so
Hmm.
Yeah.
you know.
But it's just interesting when you go through the wide array of bands that you cover, and everyone that kind of falls under this umbrella, because all the what bands you're mentioning are great in their own way, but they each have it's a genre.
Hmm.
The Dead and some of the other bands from the 60s, there's a certain sound to that. You
Hmm.
know, punk, there's obviously a certain sound to that. This Morphine or Primus or Nirvana or Pearl Jam, it's all a little bit of everything under this really interesting umbrella that clicks together. How did you undertake this project? This seems incredibly daunting.
I mean, honestly, I've put out so many books by this point that I kind of have it down what I have to do with these types of projects. The thing is, like with this project and even all my previous books, it's always a topic that I find interesting that I wanted to see as a book, but the book was never there. So
Hmm.
it's not like homework that like it's something that I don't want to do. It's something that, especially this, I got to say, going back and listening to all the bands from this era while I was doing this book, I really think that this is probably my favorite era of rock music ever, primarily because I was of the age that I was experiencing it as it was, excuse me, as it was happening. Of course, I love music from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but I wasn't old enough to have gone down to the store and purchased, Led Zeppelin Houses of the Holy when it came out.
Hmm.
But whereas I was old enough to go down to the store and buy Soundgarden Super Unknown the first day it came out. And I was
Hmm.
old enough to go see, Pearl Jam on Lollapalooza 92 when they were at the height of like, what's his name? Eddie Vedder climbing stuff and
Mhm.
coming close to dying, like that, type of stuff. So, um, I guess it just has to do with, I mean, this is really, I don't know if this is really answering your answer. I mean, answering your question, but the reason why I think this music, for me is so good too is, like you were saying, the variety, like you were saying, Smashing Pumpkins didn't sound like Soundgarden, Soundgarden didn't sound like Nine Inch Nails, so on and so forth. That's what was so great about it. Also, if you think about what we're coming from, which was the late 80s rock, all the bands pretty much look the same. Most of them, it's pretty much a bunch of white guys with like long hair looking the same. You get
Hmm.
into the 90s alternative, you have different sexes, different nationalities, different styles of music. It was almost a throwback, you could say, to bands like Santana and also Sly and the Family Stone in the late 60s, early 70s, where things were a lot more wide open and not as like predictable. That's what I like so much about it.
Yeah, it's so what was your endpoint to this? Because I mean, you also have in here, mentioning all these bands, but you also have uh Jerry Casale from Devo,
Mhm.
Fred Schneider, folks from an
Right.
earlier era kind of coming in and commenting on this as well.
Right.
And to have someone like Fred Armisen, who was kind of part of it, but also there's definitely a fandom there as well. What was the thing that kind of like, was there a, what was the structure? How did you come up with the like order with which you'd be telling this story?
Well, yeah, the reason why I thought of Jerry Casale and also Fred Schneider was because I know that they were part of punk and also new wave in the late 70s. So you could trace a lot of the alternative movement of the 90s. Like Kurt Cobain would always list Devo as like a huge favorite. I know the Soundgarden guys love Devo. I know that Trent Reznor was a big Devo fan.
Which seems
So
completely insane to me. Like picturing those two guys hanging out in a room, but that's
yeah.
me.
Well, one thing
Yeah.
just to quickly do a quick little thing is Soundgarden once did a great cover of Devo, the song called "Girl You Want," which maybe not too many people know about.
Oh, I have not heard
Yeah, you
this.
should. What's good is my favorite type of covers are when bands or artists take a well-known song and don't just do a straight-on reading. And Soundgarden slows it down and they do it's kind of like almost groove oriented. I highly recommend that cover.
Hmm. I
Very
always
good.
like their Stray Cat Blues, but
Yes.
anyway,
Yep.
but same but
Yeah,
different. But anyway,
right. But yeah, but
um,
I just figured, we have to, set the stage because that's also another thing with this book. I'm a huge Nirvana fan. I love Kurt Cobain, but the main reason why I wanted to do this book, there's so much other music to just besides Nirvana.
hmm.
Again, I love Nirvana, but there's bands from the 90s, even at the time, that I listened to as much or maybe even more than Nirvana. It's totally with each person's self preference. So I wanted to kind of spread the wealth, you could say, and maybe reintroduce people or turn people on to bands like Sebado and Shudder to, excuse me, and also Shudder to Think and also Lush and all those bands. So yeah, so again, I don't think I'm really doing a good job answering your question, which is I figured speaking to Jerry and also Fred would be good to maybe do a little bit of background as to what was going on in the 70s and 80s leading up to the 90s, which is when Nirvana and Nine Inch Nails and Soundgarden and Smashing Pumpkins come in.
With so much depth and breadth that comes in through this era, because there is so much, which with all these eras there are, but as Luke mentioned, being of this generation, being selfish because it's ours, where do you begin? Like, where do you start and go, this is the pinnacle, like this is where we have to, this is the top of the tree?
You mean like what part that I thought was the peak of the whole entire like alt rock movement, you mean?
Or yeah, either the peak of it or the sort of, I don't know whether it's the beginning, as the writer, like how you, like this is the part I either have to make sure I build off of, or that I have to get to, or where do I start at the beginning? Do I go like with where the areas you're talking about, going back to, you know, coming into the movement? Or I guess, I guess, how do you categorize it all? How do you do it?
Well, you know, one thing that I wanted to do with this book, which I guess this was like a focus that I made with every single interview I did. At the end of the book, there's 2 chapters that have standout songs and also standout albums. So I made it a point, like that was pretty much the focus with the interviews. I had to ask each person that was in a band a question about that because I wanted to include that. But then when I interviewed, for instance, people that directed music videos or a few editors of also alternative rock publications at the time, those questions didn't really fit with that. So then you have to come up with also all other different questions for those people. So that was kind of the focus. But I mean, I kind of realized going into it, I wanted it to be chronological. Like, you know, I wanted to give a little bit of background, like we talked about with bands like Devo.
Right.
The B-52s, also to go even further back, the Stooges and the Sex Pistols, and also bands like that. And then, you know, I wanted to then connect that to REM, to Jane's Addiction, so on and so forth. So I guess I was looking at it kind of chronologically, but also I wanted to make sure that I had enough to have a good 2 chapters with the standout songs and standout albums as well.
I think a lot of us got pretty polarized, or at least a lot of people I knew, we got pretty polar. I'm not a very polarized person musically, but I was pretty polarized in that era.
Oh, I've heard you say Primus sucks. Yeah.
Premises. No, they don't. They don't. And I would have gotten on certain paths, and it would have been hard for me to go down the paths that I didn't love as much.
But, you know, I was going to just jump in quick to say one thing that's also I wanted to take on with this book. It's kind of an easy way out where people are like, oh, 1991 through 94 was the peak. Then Kurt Cobain dies and then it was just over.
No.
But like looking back to it, some of my favorite albums of that whole movement came out in, say, 1995.
Yeah.
Like
I would agree
one
with
like one
that.
of my favorite albums ever is the Blind Melon Soup album, and that came out in 1995. You had Morphine putting out a great album in also 1995. You had Radiohead putting out OK Computer in 1997.
Love.
So, you know, so on and so forth. There were all these other great albums coming out even after.
Mhm.
I do agree that the quality started to dip pretty quickly after that, but overall, you still had some really great albums and bands coming out after 94.
Well, because 94 was, I mean, I guess 91 was the year punk broke, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was in fact, I interviewed the gentleman who even came up with that phrase, Dave Markey, for the book. He directed the famous documentary of that same name that has Sonic Youth and Nirvana in it that came out in the early 90s.
Is there anything, is that, I mean, everyone talks about that as sort of this cultural touchstone of like, this is the film. And I remember getting friends together in my dorm room to be like, we're watching The Year Punk Broke again. Like, that this was this thing. Where do you see the kind of, I mean, Kurt Cobain and the guys in Nirvana always talked about their predecessors and who brought them to who made them who they are, Pixies and stuff like that. What are the bands that you think, do you differ or disagree with any of these groups that have always said, oh, it's these 3 bands that really made us? Is there any ones that you feel like as a influence for these folks that gets underappreciated or under acknowledged?
Well, one thing I could say from my personal point of view, in the late 80s, I would have been in high school and I was listening primarily to just heavy metal because that was what I was exposed to with MTV and what my friends were listening to and stuff like that. Then at about the 89, 90, I start listening to other music, and I can say that bands like Living Color, Faith No More, and then later Smashing Pumpkins. Oh, and also definitely Soundgarden, and then later Smashing Pumpkins. Definitely for people like me that were transitioning from heavy metal to the alternative rock side of things, those bands in particular, particularly definitely bridge the two together. Then, like from there, I go back and I listen to the Pixies, Sonic Youth, the Frogs. Even I go back and hear all these other bands. So I mean, there are some bands that tend to get, I don't think get the credit. Like I know the Pixies are a huge part of that. REM is a huge part of that. Jane's Addiction. But for people like me, like the Faith No More Real Thing album was a huge album. Living Color Vivid was also a huge album. So I guess maybe it depends on your age and also what your listening tastes were, perhaps.
Mm. And I feel like, you mentioned gender and gender identity as a huge part of this. Also, the diversity of it, and not to say that other eras weren't as diverse,
Mhm.
but you talk to Angelo from Fishbone, you talk to I think Speech from Arrested Development, I
Arrested
believe.
Development, yeah.
Um, like these other different races, different genders, certainly Babes in Toyland and Hole and such.
Mhm.
Do you think this seems like it was the next step forward in sort of an evolution of saying like these are artists that we need to appreciate and understand and listen to what they've got to say. That's a step up from what it was in the 80s, which was a step up from what it was in the 70s, etc. Did you see that it was sort of getting more and more diverse and the conversation was widening?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most obvious example is just like what we were talking about before. Just you listen to these bands, and what was so great about these bands is no one really sounded similar. That's what was so different than from, again, going back because again, that's in the 80s, I was primarily listening to like heavy metal. It was either hair metal or it was pretty much thrash metal. There was not really any band branching out. It wasn't like the late 60s or like early 70s when you have bands that are combining things, or you have a band like, Zeppelin that's doing a folk song next to Kashmir, or, like that type of stuff. It's kind of like you're just staying in like one lane. And that's what was so great about. I mean, you listen to it. Like I was going back recently listening to the Smashing Pumpkins album called Gish,
Hmm.
and it starts out really heavy rocking. Then in the middle, there's four songs that are just pretty much acoustic. Then it goes back to like rock again. And it got me thinking pretty much what I think they were doing. If you listen to Led Zeppelin concerts from the mid 70s, they followed that same format that they start out heavy, then they all put down their electric guitars, they pick up their acoustics and they're seated and they're playing like that for a few songs. Then they end also heavy again. So that type of stuff you would never hear on like say a Poison album or even like a Megadeth album. It was pretty much one lane you were staying in with the album.
What do you think is the peak year of this whole genre? Like we were saying, 91, and then you mentioned 95. What to you seems like the high point that everything was trying to reach that peak ever more afterwards?
It's easy to say 1991, just because you had Lollapalooza, the first Lollapalooza, then you had Nevermind, you also had you had Soundgarden, Bad Motorfinger, Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Then you also had like U2 putting out a huge album, Metallica putting out a huge album, even bands that weren't strictly alternative or grunge. So rock was definitely changing from say like 2 years before. But I mean, again, you could say possibly 1992 was a huge year because that's when Pearl Jam Mania happened and everything. Um, you could, again, 1995, some of my favorite albums are from 1995, but obviously that wasn't the peak of it, I don't think. You could definitely say by 1995, it's clear that there's a lot of fourth wave bands coming in that are just ripping off Nirvana and Pearl Jam, which you didn't have in, say, like in 1991.
Mm.
So, but then again, who's to say it wasn't possibly 1990? Because that was when Faith No More broke with Epic, and that's when Jane's Addiction put out Ritual del Habitual, which is a huge classic album. But you know what? I'll just make it easy. I'll just go with 1991. How about that?
Easy enough.
Is there, after listening to all these and going through all this, like putting it all together, is there any particular album that you find yourself going back to all the time still?
The one that I could say I could listen to, I've listened to since it came out, and I could listen to it today, and it still is timeless, is Blind Melon Soup.
That's the one for you.
Yeah, that's the
Huh.
one for me. But then that said, I have like 100 number twos. I don't know if you want to hear it.
Mhm.
You want to tell you some
Oh,
other ones that I
please,
feel
yeah.
Yeah,
strongly about?
please. Yeah, of course.
I love a lot of the, I mean, of course, I love the ones that are like well known, but I'm always the type of gentleman that always goes for like the lesser known. For instance, the first, like my all-time favorite band is Queen. I first was turned on to them when I was young, and the song called "Another One Bites the Dust" was the big
Hmm.
song. So I go to the record store and I don't buy the game that has that song on it. I go and I buy their first album that no one even knows about. You know, like so I was
Hmm.
always kind
Great
of,
King Rat, sure. I
yeah, I was
got
always
you.
Yeah,
trying to
Yeah.
dig a little deeper.
absolutely.
So I mean, I always loved the Shudder to Think album called Pony Express record.
Hmm.
That one to this day sounds like nothing that's come before or even like after it. Absolutely love that. Also, by doing this book, I hadn't heard the Lush album called Split in many, many years. I was obsessed with that album in the summer of 1994. I even saw them live and they were fantastic that summer. And then for some reason, I just kind of didn't listen to them for decades. And then I went back because I interviewed Mickey for this book, the singer from
Hmm.
Lush, and I just totally was blown away again by by that album. That album's a fantastic album.
Awesome.
Yeah, I also and then of course there's Primus Sailing the Seas of Cheese I loved. I love Meat Puppets Too High to Die. Jeff Buckley Grace is a great one.
Mm.
Yeah, of course Faith No More Angel Dust. I love Nirvana, Soundgarden, all the like obvious ones, but oh, and also an album I totally forgot too that I was reintroduced to was Bake Sale by the band Sebadoh. That
Hmm.
was
Oh
a great
yeah.
one. And then also another one that I was reintroduced to is what is it called? It is Urge Overkill Saturation.
Hmm.
Mm.
That's a
Yeah.
band that a lot of people really just know them from the famous Girl You'll Be a Woman Soon
Right.
song. But that one album, Saturation, is a great rock album from start to
That's a great
finish. In
album.
fact, I've tried to go back and listen to other albums of theirs, and no other albums of theirs hit me like that album. That album from front to back, I think, is great.
Hmm.
I also loved, and this is complete bias, and I think Heidi will agree with me 100%, that you talked to and included Jeff and Stephen McDonald from Red Cross.
Yes.
That their take on the scene coming from where they were in their eras. And then also you had did one of the last interviews with Steve Albini,
Mhm.
which I should point out here. My copy of the Link Ray's Greatest Hits is from his record collection. But
Oh,
anyway,
wow.
Hmm.
Nice.
um, what was he like in talking with him? Was he
He
hard
could
to get
not
a
have
hold
been a
of?
nicer, kinder gentleman. What happened was I was interviewing David Pajo for the book, who was part of the band Slint. That's also, again, a great thing by doing this book. I was also turned on to some albums that I was not familiar with at all. I was not familiar really with the Spiderland album by the band Slint, and I was, again, blown away by that album. So, by getting myself familiar with that album, I reached out to David Pajo. I spoke with him for the book. And I knew that Steve Albini had, worked with him in the past. So I was like, "Are you still in contact with him?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, I speak to him, pretty regularly." I'm like, "Oh, can you maybe like just put me in contact with him?" He's like, "Well, no. All you have to do is just call him at his studio. He'll just pick up the phone and you just speak to him directly and see if he wants to do it." So like the next day, I did that, and I kind of have a rule of thumb as an interview. If I ever have a lead, I always want to call as soon as possible because you never know what's going to happen in the future. So I called maybe the next day, and who should pick up but Steve. I explained who I was and told him what I was doing. And he was like, "Yeah, I'm actually doing nothing right now if you want to speak to me right now." So I spoke to him for like 30 minutes and it was great. And then sadly, like 1 or 2 or 3 months later, he, passed away. So I'm
Wow, that
glad I didn't
quickly.
put it off because it was,
Yeah.
I think, one of the best interviews for the book. And again, I know he kind of has a persona of maybe being a little prickly or something like that, but he couldn't have been nicer and gave very thoughtful answers to my questions. So that was definitely a high point for this book. Speaking of Steve,
Awesome.
Yeah, how nervous were you making that call? Because
I'll
again,
be
like you
honest,
said,
not
that
very nervous because I've
reputation.
done, I mean, I'm a huge fan of his, whole production work, but just I've done so many interviews in my life that I've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews over the years that to the point speaking to someone, it doesn't really get me that nervous. you know.
So there's nothing Steve Albini could do to you that hasn't been done before, is what you're saying.
Well,
Right.
I mean, it was also over the phone, so it wasn't like we were doing it face to face that you know, he could spit in my face or something.
Right. Can't make you cry. Or he wouldn't know if he did. Well, the book is full of so many names. I mean, so many people. It's like a who's who. Like you there, it's hard to think of people you didn't get to talk to you, which is a credit to you and your work.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you know, again, I tried to balance it between people you would expect, and then I wanted to speak to people that, you know, like, again, what was a great thing was I went online and there's a site, I forget the name of the site, but it lists all the past playlists throughout the years of the 120 minutes program.
Oh,
So
wow.
while I was doing research
That's
for the book,
awesome.
I would look at those lists and I would look up the songs on YouTube and be like, oh, I forgot about this band, that band, this band. So by doing that, you know, like a band like, for instance, Helium, like I hadn't even thought of in like a
Oh
long, long time. I
yeah.
was like, oh my God, I actually love that song. I remember that song. So I went back and got in contact with them. And so, you know, it was that site was great, just going back and rediscovering a lot of the songs from the past 120 minutes or songs and videos from the 120 minutes programs.
One of the things that always fascinates me, and I love this type of biography or story, because it's all done first person and it is all from these people's mouths what happened, and these are folks who were there, so they know
Mhm.
at best what happened. And from our own projects, there's always that sense of like the tipping point when you're like, well, I got this person, and this is the thing. Suddenly we have a book. Like
Mhm.
before, it's an idea, it's a concept, it's a hope. I hope this works. Who was that person where you're like, all right, now we've got a book? When they said yes, where you're like, great, we're off to the races now.
I'd say probably Ian MacKaye from the band Fugazi.
Mm,
Because to the best of my knowledge, I don't think he does a lot of these types of interviews. And I've interviewed him a few times in the past for books and I think a website or two. So I guess he recognized my name. So I got in contact, and it took a little while to maybe convince him and also set it up. But he, I think, was fantastic in this book with some great stories. He also finally set the record straight concerning there's the whole famous story that supposedly Fugazi turned down $1 million record deal with Ahmet Ertegun.
hmm.
And not only does he clear that up, he also adds a whole other section, a whole other second part to that story, that there was actually a second major label that was interested in signing Fugazi and was going to give them the Kings to the Kingdom, and they pretty much turned them down as well for the, you know, same reason. So yeah, I would say Ian was a yeah, he was definitely a very big part of showing me that this book was going to be something special.
And I mean, in many ways, him and Steve Albini are two almost tent poles
Mhm.
for the era and for the book as well. Who were the other big gets where you were like, great, I got this person, they're in? Because like
Well,
you
I mean,
said,
I
there's a lot
think.
of folks who I feel like I don't normally hear from, but maybe that's
Mm,
just I'm not listening to the right page, like
right.
reading the right magazines.
Well, to me, you can't do a 90s alternative rock book without speaking to Matt Pinfield.
Hmm.
Mm,
So I just happen to be a somewhat of a acquaintance. Like I have his text, I have his phone number. I could text him and things like that. So I reached out to him, and he was. I got to say, there's certain people in my line of work. Some people are jerks, and some people cannot be nicer and more accommodating and helpful. And Matt Pinfield has been the salt of the earth since the moment I met him
Nice.
many, many years ago. He's nicest, sweetest, most, like, you know, helpful guy. So yeah, he was a great person to speak to, and it was great to also speak to Kennedy, because I remember at the time watching all the alternative nation shows that were being shown on, you know, MTV late night. So it was cool to speak with her as well. In fact, she
Yeah,
was
give
nice enough
her.
to grant me two separate interviews because there were some questions we didn't get to the first interview. So that was great
mm.
to speak with her.
It's
And then
awesome.
and then also just speaking to also Fred Armisen, because he was a huge fan of all
Hmm.
those alternative rock bands. You know, he had some pretty funny and also cool things to say for the book. So
Yeah.
those are some. And then, you know, it was a very good interview too, which also made the book special. Was also Moby.
Yeah.
He
Mm.
also had some very good things to say for the book. Some very insightful things. He, I think, did the best way to summarize when alternative rock in the '90s started to go in the, go like down the toilet. He did a great. He just totally summed it up. And, you know, to his credit, he said, you know, I'm not going to say that all those bands like Limp Bizkit and, you know, Korn and all those, like, you know, bands that are not my cup of tea, but he even said the same, you know, not to say that those bands aren't bad, there's some aspects of those bands that are, exciting or unique or whatever, but he then put it all in perspective. So that was also interesting to hear his point of view in the book.
When was the last time you talked to Matt Pinfield? How's he doing? Do you know?
He's doing good. I
Good.
texted him about a week or two ago because I wanted to send him a copy of the book, and he got back to me right away and said, "Sure, send it to my address," because I've sent him past books I've interviewed him for. And yeah, he seems to be doing good. If you follow him
Excellent.
online, he posts pictures. He's back now
Yeah.
to working out and going on hikes and stuff. So yeah, it seems like he's back to a full health, which was very nice to hear because when I interviewed him for the book, it was maybe like a few months later that that horrible thing happened. So I was like, oh, I hope this isn't enough, because it was sad to hear that. Because my whole thing was I wanted to get in contact with Steve Albini and send him a copy of the book, and then and then I obviously couldn't because he passed away. And then with this thing with Matt, I really wanted to send a copy of the book to Matt because I think he's really going to like this book and be proud of. It kind of puts into perspective how important he was. There's some very nice
Definitely.
things
Yeah.
people say about him in the book.
Yeah.
So I wanted him to see that. So I'm happy that he's going to get the opportunity to read the book soon.
That's awesome.
It's really
Yeah, he's
great.
great. He's really great.
So you mentioned Moby saying when he felt like the tide was turning and the sort of, I mean, I don't know how do you describe because it's alternative, and I mean the title is so perfect, alternative for the masses.
Mm.
Um, when did he say was that tide turning, and do you agree with that theory?
Well, Moby pointed more towards like when something he said, which was pretty good, which I totally forgot, but he's right. By 96, you could say alternative rock had gotten very, very quiet and very calm and not offending anybody. Like we're thinking about like the Wallflowers, Sarah
Hmm.
McLachlan. It's very calm music. And then at some point around 96 or 97, there's a radio station somewhere that suddenly realizes, oh, if we play Metallica and Korn, we'll get great ratings or something like that. And they did, and the ratings went totally through the roof. So then suddenly you don't have these very calm alternative bands. Now you have like guys rapping over alternative rock, but with heavy metal guitars, and it's like this whole, it's almost as if REM and Nirvana never even happened, or
Mm,
if Nirvana happened, it's just guys shamelessly ripping off Nirvana. It's not like anyone putting their own unique spin on Nirvana, it's just them taking the easy way out. But honestly, you could say the mid 90s, it was probably because you could say, like for instance, I'll tell you what, I was never a big fan of the band Bush, but music is so awful nowadays. Rock music is so awful. I hear Bush music now, and I'm like, oh man, Bush is like a treat to my ears
Right.
compared
yeah, it's an
to,
oasis, no
yeah,
pun
yeah. I
intended.
mean, it's just, so, and the thing is too, again, to this day, I'm not a Bush fan, but you got to give the guy credit, Gavin credit. He wrote all those songs himself.
Hmm.
He didn't have to hire 50 different people to write his songs, so you got to, give him credit for that. But yeah, when it would seem like 94, 95 is when you start seeing the bands that are just like shamelessly ripping off Nirvana or shamelessly ripping off Pearl Jam. That was definitely the beginning of the end for me. And then sadly, really the ending is when people like Shannon Hoon die, Jeff Buckley die, then it just seemed like it just was never going to be the same after that.
And it's interesting too. You talk about, and it's any scene where one band kind of sticks their head up and is successful, and there's a rush to then go sign every artist that is, Seattle is the kind of ground zero of this, of like, all right, well, Nirvana's big, or Nirvana gets signed, Pearl Jam. All right, well, we're gonna go out, we're gonna go sign Mudhoney, we're gonna go sign Tad. I don't know if anyone did, any major label did that, but you know what I mean? Like this,
Mm.
we're gonna just sweep everyone up, give them a deal, and let's see who kind of comes out on top. Um, do you think that was beneficial as far as getting stuff out, or was it just never destined to work because you were taking all these artists who just weren't at certainly Cobain levels of skill, but also just not at that point in their career where they're ready to make that leap? And it was just a let's grab everyone versus let's watch this artist develop.
Well, I mean, in certain instances, I think it was good. I mean, without Nirvana or even like Fugazi creating such a big buzz underground, I don't think Shudder to Think would have ever gotten signed to a major label
Hmm.
because of Kurt Cobain wearing Sebado shirts. Maybe that had to do with Sebado. putting out an album on Sub Pop and getting a lot of like, promotion and things like that. So for certain bands, I think it probably was a good thing. The other thing though that you have to, that's maybe connected to this, is how certain artists could handle the fame and certain artists could not handle the fame. Look at a band
Mm,
like REM could totally handle the fame. They seem to have no problem with it and they took it all in stride. Then you had someone like Kurt Cobain who just could not handle the fame at all.
mm,
So maybe that's connected, how some people can deal with it, some people can't deal with it. There's a great quote in the book from Chris Kirkwood from the band Meat Puppets, who says, if you think about the Beatles before they were famous and not, is the same with Kurt Cobain. Like there's one day that Kurt Cobain could just walk out the door and no one knows who he is. Then the next day, his quote is something like, you walk out and suddenly girls are like peeing their pants over him.
Right.
So that must, for someone who's not prepared for that, must just totally screw them up mentally. And then, of course, it's kind of well known that Kurt Cobain had drug issues and also probably manic depression issues. So you put all that together, and that's obviously not a very good combination.
no. Um, as we wrap up, I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but is there one band or one record that you're like, I mean, it sounds like Soup is the one to go to, but
Yeah, Soup for me
is there,
personally.
is there another record that you'd be like, go listen to this record? This is such a great encapsulation of that era. If we're saying that 91, early 90s is the pinnacle of this genre of music. For folks who have Nevermind, who have heard Bad Motorfinger,
Mhm.
what's the thing that folks who maybe weren't there at the time should go check out?
There are two albums that kind of we were talking about earlier. What we like so much about this era of music was the wide variety of music, that all the bands sounded different.
Hmm.
Well, there were also certain bands that not only sounded different, but there was one band in particular that each album, it was almost like you could be fooled into thinking it was a different band, that each album, like one song would sound totally different from the next one. And that band I'm talking about is Faith No More. And there's two albums in particular, Angel Dust from 1992 and the
Hmm.
album called King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime from 1995.
Hmm.
If you listen to those two albums, they'll go from like a death metal song to a country song to like a folky type song to like a hip hop funk song. They even covered the Midnight Cowboy soundtrack. I mean, excuse me, the Midnight Cowboy title track.
Mm-hmm.
They even covered Easy from the band Commodores,
Mm-hmm.
so there's even like prog rock type things. So there's, punk rock type things too. So you know, th- to me, I think those two albums, at least stateside, never got the credit. I know the Angel Dust album was a huge hit in Europe, but that album tended to be looked at as a disappointment sales wise to the previous record. But by far, Angel Dust is the best album, and King for a Day. Those two albums, I think, really, to me, really sum up 90s alternative rock and how nothing should be predictable. Just show up that day in the recording studio, whatever you want to do. Let's just work on it and let's just make it our own, that type of thing.
Alternative for the Masses, the 90s alt-rock revolution and oral history by Greg Prato is available right now wherever you get your books.
Nigel, is that you? Are you here, Nigel?